people from the chat from different places. We've got Hong Kong, Barcelona, Romania, Yemen. I'm from New Zealand originally. Is anybody dialing in from New Zealand? Probably a very strange time to be dialing in. It would be about, I don't know, 1 a.m. or something over there. So hopefully if you're there, you've you're on your way to bed soon. So yeah, I'm Katy. I'm from LearnJam, and I'm here to share a resource that we've recently developed with the British Council called the Toolkit for Inclusive Teaching Strategies, and it's for remote language learning contexts. So I'll share a little bit about what we're going to be looking at today, and then we'll get into it. So we're going to begin the session with a short check-in. I'll explain what that is in a moment. And then I'll tell you a little bit about LearnJam. So this is the organization that I work for. And then we'll think about why do we need a toolkit? And I think Marie's already answered quite a lot of these questions, but yeah, hopefully I can contribute something. How we developed this inclusive teaching toolkit. And then I'll introduce you to the toolkit itself. So before we begin, to prepare for the session, I'd really like to do a really short check-in. So a check-in is a pause at the beginning of a meeting, and it's to help us reflect on how we feel at this moment. It's kind of another way of asking the question, like, how are you today? Which I don't know about the people in the chat, but I find that question quite hard to answer sometimes. Like, my response is always just like, fine. Or when I was in class, it was like, fine, Katy teacher. So we use a check-in as a way to think about how you feel and to share with the class or the group how you feel, to build empathy. And it may be that you just had a very stressful class, or you're running late and you feel in a rush. But yeah, it's a way to build kindness and empathy towards each other. So the check-in task today is, I want you to stop for a moment wherever you are and look around your environment. And I want you to find an object that represents how your day is going so far. So if possible, if you could go pick this object up, hold it in your hands, and then I want you to write in the chat, what is your object and how does it represent how you feel right now? So my object is this pencil. I don't know if you can see. It's got this pencil. I have a very bad habit of chewing the end of the pencil. So I think it describes how I'm feeling, which is a little bit nervous, to be honest, to be talking to so many people. But yeah, just to share a little bit about myself, to build a bit of empathy about how I'm coming to the situation. But it's also very exciting to see so many people here today. So we've got a blanket, coffee, a pile of books, a mug of hot tea, feeling relaxed and warm. Oh, it's going so fast. A baby, a bit tired, yes. A cozy dressing gown, nice. Mobile phone, birthday cake. Lovely, yeah, nice to see so many objects. Sounds like a lot of people are coming in from cold environments. Okay, thanks everybody for sharing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LearnJam, which is the organization where I come from. So we are a digital learning agency. We help organizations achieve their goals through learning experiences that are engaging, effective, and inclusive. And we work with organizations to design and develop these learning experiences for their learners. So for example, for the British Council, it might be teachers like yourselves that we're designing for, or English language learning content for learners in schools. Or in the top right, you can see that there's a product called Exeto, where our learners were for managers and professionals needing to upskill in English communication skills. And then below, there's one called Cognity, which is for K-12 students. But the common thread here is that we're a learner-focused in our approach, which we apply to many contexts and organizations. So as an organization, we're also really passionate about inclusivity. I think we all witnessed, as we all witnessed, COVID-19 massively accelerated the trend towards online learning. And the nature of this change means that a lot of the learning activities that we developed during that time were very rushed. And we found that this exacerbated exclusion and inequality issues that already existed in online learning. So in response to this, in 2020, LearnJam was funded by Innovate UK to look at how we can address these issues in inclusivity and access. So our aim was to develop a set of tools and services that help learning providers and designers and educators build more inclusive learning practices. So it's a practice that we've come to call inclusive learning experience design. And so as Paul mentioned, we've developed some frameworks and tools to help learning designers create more inclusive learning experiences. I'm going to say this word inclusive a lot this session. It's going to get stuck on my tongue. So after I've shared today, if you're interested in these frameworks, feel free to visit our website, just learnjam.com to see more. So as part of the research and the work that we did, looking into inclusive learning design, we found that exclusion happens a lot when we solve problems or create learning experiences using our own biases. So we recognize that as educators, that means learning designers or teachers, we're not impartial, neutral contributors to a learning experience or a class. We often bring our own biases, experiences, and identities that either consciously or subconsciously direct and influence how we design or how we teach. So to confront the role that we play as educators, we've come up with this team member bias Venn to help raise our own awareness of our privileges and preferences. So I'll share a little bit about myself. So this is me. I'm Katy. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm 34 to be precise. My pronouns are she, her. Some things that inform my learning design background, which I think are really important to acknowledge at the beginning of creating educational products, is that I'm privileged enough to be university educated. I have a bachelor in psychology and media and a CELTA, which I'm sure many of you here are familiar with. I've worked previously as an English language teacher in Asia and Europe and back in New Zealand, and then worked in publishing before joining LearnJam as a learning designer. So I'm in London, I'm a British citizen, but I was born in New Zealand. I have a mixed race background. And for better or worse, I bring all of those cultural experiences with me when I create learning experiences. So here's what we're here for today, to look at the toolkit for inclusive teaching strategies. We're going to start by thinking about why do we need a toolkit for inclusive teaching strategies. I think Marie has already spoken at length about some of the reasons of why we need to support our learners, but I just want to share a case study with you. And while reading, I'd like you to think about if this sounds familiar or like any of the learners that you might have in your remote teaching classrooms or your in-person classrooms. So we have Marco. Marco is a 14-year-old male student in your class. Marco often arrives late to your lesson with his camera off. Marco regularly finds it difficult to organize and plan when to do his homework and often doesn't complete the work. When you're presenting new language or information, Marco often appears bored or uninterested. He sometimes doesn't appear to understand instructions or tasks. Marco doesn't enjoy reading long texts, but can speak well in class. And he's sociable and can be very creative in group settings. So if you downloaded the pre-task content, you might have seen this. And I think that as teachers, I think we all agree that the participation and progress and success of all of our learners is important. But sometimes the way that our classrooms are traditionally set up as a one-size-fits-all model means that some learners can feel excluded or experience barriers to learning. So if we take Marco as an example, he's sociable, creative, and he's talkative, but he seems to struggle with organization and punctuality and learning in this environment. So maybe something about our approach as teachers isn't working. And we think, how can we help Marco to fulfill his potential? So the toolkit that we've developed with the British Council is designed to help learners feel more included in the remote language teaching classroom. And before I show you the toolkit, I'll just share how we arrived at a toolkit like this and some of the research and testing that went into it, as it's always interesting, for me at least, to see a little bit behind the scenes of resources that we work with. So how we developed this inclusive teaching toolkit. So kind of 3 stages or parts to how we developed the toolkit. So the first one is we looked at the foundations and thought about the foundational thinking. Sorry. Then we thought about the inclusive learning design, or what we know about learning design, inclusive learning design. And then we prototyped and tested our ideas. So we'll start by looking at the foundational thinking. So this image here, which you can see is an iceberg, and this signifies all of the research and thinking that goes into creating a product like a toolkit, which I'm sure you can relate to as teachers as you think of all of the planning and the prep for the lessons that you do before you come and arrive to the lesson. And we found that creating an effective and inclusive learning product is really challenging and complex. And we believe that at LearnJam, it's important to start by looking at the foundations of your learning design approach. And this way you have an opportunity to make a genuinely impactful and engaging experience for learners that has a positive impact. So what do I mean by foundational thinking? So it's looking at the project goals. So we define the project goals with those goals in mind, form some research to understand our users, which are teachers like yourselves, and then gather some insights or evidence and ideas. So earlier this year, LearnJam, we carried out research for the British Council into how to best support teaching provision in the remote settings of the Americas. So let's look at how we explored that. So we looked at the project goals. So the assumption is that better supporting one second. Oh, sorry, one thing to note just before I move on. For the purposes of this project, we use a definition of special educational needs, which is a broad definition and includes things which learners need because of some kind of impairment, like, for example, partial sight, partial hearing, or a mental handicap, or because of certain socioeconomic, cultural, and/or linguistic reasons, or because of some other unclear reason they experience a significant difficulty in learning. Okay, so now, I'll move on to the project goals. So we started with the project goal, and the ultimate goal of this project is a reduction in the number of learners with SEN who are currently being excluded from online learning. So we have this question of how might we reduce the number of learners with SEN who are currently being excluded from online learning? And SEN was identified as an area for research because not very much or very little accommodation seemed to have been made by organizations involved in remote teaching. And there was a lack of research in English language teaching and learning with SEN. And then we made an assumption that the best way to reduce the number of learners who are excluded is to better support the teachers who are meeting those needs of the learners. So we have another question of how might we make it easier for teachers to cater to the needs of learners with SEN? And this might be because teachers are overworked, time constrained, unable to devote the time to developing awareness or resources for the learners who need the support. So who were our users? We were looking at teachers who teach languages remotely. So this means that you and the learners aren't in the same physical location, maybe for the whole course or just part of the course. Most of our respondents were teaching learners in their teens, between 13 and 18. Many were from an urban environment. And many of the teachers in our survey, I found this quite interesting, they have a lot of face-to-face experience. So more than 60% said they had more than 10 years of face-to-face experience. But the teachers who responded didn't have a lot of remote experience. Many teachers said that they had less than 2 years. And I guess that this is because of teaching online due to COVID has only come online recently. So my colleague Laura Patsko, she performed the research, and I think that there may have been quite a few teachers here or some teachers here who were interviewed or spoke to her about this project. So as part of the research plan, she asked teachers questions like, so what challenges do your learners face when learning remotely? What do you think are the best ways to overcome these challenges? How do you feel about teaching remotely? And how do you feel about teaching learners with SEN? How do you know when a learner in a class has a SEN? And do these learners have a formal diagnosis, or are you just responding intuitively to their needs? And what are the most common needs in your classroom? What do you think are the best ways to address the needs of these learners? And where do teachers and learners seem to need the most support? So we asked these questions to a range of teachers in different contexts. And before I share some of the results, I'd like to hear in the chat. So what challenges do your learners face when learning remotely? Do you have any challenges that you might be able to share? Distractions, focus problems, connection, yes. Staying focused, motivation, engagement, computer anxiety, self-regulation, attention. It's interesting, yes. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of similar problems across the board. Staying on task, engagement, yeah. So when we started this research, we kind of had in mind, so we had the project goal of how might we reduce the number of learners with SEN who are currently being excluded from online learning. We asked these questions to teachers. Here are some of the things that we thought that we would hear. So we thought we would hear things like, I don't know how to help a learner with ASD, or what do my dyslexic learners need? Or I want specific training in an area like ADHD. So yeah, we'd expected the research to kind of narrow the scope of the toolkit and give us a specific area of SEN to focus on. Like, for example, if all participants had told us they needed training in one specific area, we might have focused on that. But we didn't hear teachers specifically asking these things. We didn't hear them saying, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that, or I want this specific training. But what we did hear teachers telling us was what you've just said in the chat. My learners are dealing with distractions in their environment, and learning remotely means lower motivation. And another big one was there's a lot of information available online, but I'm really busy. I'm a teacher. I don't have time to go through and look at all of these things. So this, in a way, shifted our focus away from labels and creating a resource that talked about specific special educational needs, or using that deficit model to looking at the experience of learners in the remote classroom. And by experience, I mean learners that are dealing with distractions, suffering from low motivation, or find remote learning just more challenging than in person. And the reasons for this could be for many different reasons. It could be because they are having a busy day, or there's illness, or their working memory. Yeah, they're having difficulties with working memory and distractions. So yeah, there's a whole range of reasons why learners might be experiencing this. So we've just looked at our users, or our teachers, to understand our foundations and try to develop something where there is actually a real need, instead of putting out a resource or something out there which already exists or is not actually what teachers would need and use. So some of the things that we've learned from the research was that the teachers expressed the need for concrete practical support in remote teaching in general, and in inclusivity in general, rather than focusing specifically on the learner deficit, in order to kind of improve learning for all learners. So next we spin around the circle. So have a look at number 1 and number 2. We'll look at the inclusive learning design. So inclusive learning design here. So this is what we know about inclusive learning design at LearnJam. And when developing any product, we consider ways to apply what we know to be effective, which also means inclusive. And as mentioned earlier, we worked with Innovate UK, Erasmus, and other organizations on how to design more inclusive learning products. So here are some of the principles. I'm going to share just 3 principles that apply to both the toolkit, but are also general good principles for inclusive learning as a whole. So the first principle, or first idea that we have, is that to create more inclusive learning experiences, we want to identify and avoid barriers to access. So a barrier is something that gets in the way of a learner being successful. A learning barrier might be physical, cultural, cognitive, emotional, or system-wide. And it could be lack of access to a device, lack of time, a loud or unstable learning environment, motivation, reduced working memory, anxiety, confidence, lack of previous knowledge, and the list goes on. So here we're following a social model of disability, which frames disability and special educational needs in terms of barriers created by society, which undermine an individual's or a learner's ability to succeed, which kind of shifts us away from that medical model, which focuses on identifying and labeling. So we think in this approach, we say that an inclusive approach means thinking not only about the classroom or the course, but about the learner's wider context and what barriers they may face. So just as a note on this as well, we believe that labels, like for example, dyslexia, are very useful in terms of enabling a student or a learner to access relevant support. But often we find that labels can only provide a snapshot and don't capture the full picture of a learner's ability over time. So as we saw with Marco, a label can kind of skew our perception of ability and mask the positive characteristics like creativity, innovative thinking, problem solving. And in many contexts, including family members of my own, some learners don't receive a label because they're considered to be below the threshold and maybe not diagnosed at all. So we also heard Marie talking about this earlier, and she shared that a visual of the distribution of the 3 boxes behind the barrier, and talked about learners being left behind in this equal environment. So we have the same principle here, where we believe that equality is not equity. So equality means each individual group or person, group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. And equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So some examples of this would be inflexible lesson plans. Equality is inflexible lesson plans. Everybody receives the same lesson plan, while equity is adapting classes based on the needs of the learners. So with online learning, we see this quite often. Equality is creating neutral characters. So for example, using characters with skin color like purple or green, instead of taking that natural variation that happens across the world. And equity is seeing people who actually look like me in learning materials. And equality is charged everybody's charged the same amount, while equity is offering sliding scale fees, payment plans, and scholarships. And then the last one here, we have a variability. So design and plan for variability. So as Marie said earlier, thinking that inclusion only concerns disabled learners is really misleading. There's really no such thing as a normal learner. So I like this quote of learner variability is the rule, it's not the exception. We're all just so different. We come from different places, have different backgrounds. As I shared in my the Venn diagram before, I come from one space, another person comes from another place. We'll have a lot of baggage. And taking this into account, that means that the one size fits all model just really, it doesn't serve our learners. So these are just some of the principles and ideas of what we know about inclusive learning design at LearnJam. And if you're interested in reading more of these, we do have an ebook, which is Learning Design Principles, which goes into these in a little bit more detail than I'm able to do today. So that's on our website, learnjam.com. So we still have these things. So we've got 2 sort of parts now. We've got what we learned from the teachers in our research, what they expressed the need for. So it was that concrete, practical support. And then we now have what we know about inclusive learning design. So it's to identify, avoid barriers, promoting an equitable classroom, and planning for variability. And so this resulted in a decision to frame the toolkit around inclusive teaching strategies, rather than describing or listing the defects of special educational needs or the challenges that specific learners face. Okay, so we've got this final wheel in the circle before we get into the toolkit itself. I just want to share one more part that we went through when developing the toolkit, and it was looking at prototyping and testing. So we had our research, our ideas and theories, And we designed them up and put them into this kind of prototype, which we then shared with a lot of people for feedback to see what was working before we created the toolkit in full. So we created this sample or prototype module and shared it with teachers. And what was in the prototype? So along with the points before about how we framed the toolkit, here are some of the other things that we really wanted to achieve. So we wanted to help create a more inclusive mindset. We wanted to help teachers to empathize. And we didn't want this to be a resource that you would just read and then put back on your bookshelf. We wanted to really encourage action. So what this brought into the toolkit was, so for example, to help create a more inclusive mindset, one of the ideas that we had was that we would use a peer discussion. So discussion is a really essential part of this toolkit, which you'll see shortly. To help build empathy, we wanted to show and use case studies of real learners. And then to encourage action, we wanted to use tips and strategies that you could kind of use tomorrow and think about how you could put these into your lesson plans immediately. So it wasn't just me that did this. So we developed a syllabus outline and sample content with subject matter experts. One of the key contributors was Dr. Martin Bloomfield. So Martin's a lecturer and trainer. He develops skills to improve communication across cultures. And then he's also the founder of Dyslexia Bites, which is a resource to raise dyslexia awareness and more. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to check him out at dyslexiabites.org. So once we kind of had our sample prototype and module ready to go, we sent it to groups of teachers, and then here's me. I sat down and I asked them more questions to understand what was working and what wasn't working. So I kind of asked questions like just broad questions. What do you like? What do you not like about this? And then what do you think of X, Y, Z? So we really needed to get the teachers' opinions on this because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I come from a certain mindset, and what I'm creating may not be right for the audience. So to get feedback from the audience, from the users, the teachers, is really important. So the question, this is kind of thinking, what did we learn? I asked teachers, what did you like? And here's a quote. Teacher said, I noticed that the module was focused on teacher practice, not the learner's capacity or skills. So you're not tagging learners, not using labels, which they found is an inclusive practice. So we learned that the focus of supporting inclusive teaching in general, rather than just taking a deficit model, worked well with our teachers. I say, what didn't you like? What do you not like? Teachers said, so we were trying to ask teachers to reflect, but the way that we designed the reflection prompts wasn't working. Teachers said the reflection prompt was important, but the way that the page was set up made it easy to miss and skip to the next section. So the usability wasn't very good. Yeah, we learned we needed to make them more useful. And then I asked the teachers, what do you think of like the discussion? And teachers were really positive about this. They said, I can't stress enough how important it is to discuss and share with other people, especially in a teaching context. And this is great. I really liked this stage. The opportunity for teachers to meet and discuss these ideas is the best. So we learned that the peer discussion was a really important part of the learning process and helped to motivate teachers to continue with using the toolkit. So we had those 3 points that I just mentioned. So the focus of supporting inclusive teaching in general worked well. Reflection prompts needed to be more useful, and peer discussion was an important part of that process. So now I've been through all the phases, finally, walked you through the last almost a year of my life. We can show you the final product, and I'd like to kind of get you to try it out. We'll be using the chat box for this, but yes, let's have a look. So welcome to the Toolkit for Inclusive Teaching Strategies. So the toolkit is made up of 7 modules, each with strategies and principles for making your practice more inclusive. So I'll we've got one, why do you need inclusive teaching strategies? How to manage the environment for everybody. So that's the online environment and the learner's physical environment. How to give inclusive instructions. How to set up inclusive interactions. How to help learners engage with information better. How to differentiate learning online. And then how to build belonging online. So this toolkit, it's flexible, so it's not designed to be done in order. The modules, you can kind of start with the module where you think will be the most impactful for your context. I would encourage everybody to start with the why do we need inclusive teaching strategies, get a baseline, but the other ones you can pick them up as you think, oh, I would like to upskill in this, or I need to work on this for my context. And as Marie said earlier, she said good teachers already know how to include people. And I mentioned in the research that a lot of the teachers we're working with are very experienced. And so when you go through this toolkit, you'll find that these strategies are ideas and practices that you probably already know, but we're trying to provide opportunity and space to review what's working for you, what's working for your learners, what can you do more, what can you sort of sub out and change, and think about why. So what happens in a module? So each module is divided into 3 kind of broad sections. So there's self-study, an application, and as I've talked about already, a group discussion. So this would be the first kind of part, self-study, where you learn simple practical strategies to use in the remote language teaching learning classroom. And here we show the principles behind the strategy, examples, and then also those benefits as well. So we end the self-study lesson by trying out or suggesting to learners to try out a strategy in an upcoming lesson and making notes on how it went. So what benefits you saw with your learners, what challenges you may have had in implementing these strategies. We acknowledge that not all of the strategies will be workable for every single context. Everybody's in a different context with different learners, different cultures, and some may work better than others in different scenarios. And then we have this discussion. So we suggest setting up small group discussions at your school. The discussions are peer-led. Peer-led with a self-facilitation guide. And as we saw in the testing, they're a powerful way to share ideas, build community and accountability. But if you're not working in a context where you can have a group discussion, the activities can definitely also be completed solo or as reflection and review tasks. So let's walk through an example. Now this requires a little bit of participation in the chat box, so get your keyboards ready. There's mine. So I'm going to share with you one of the points from one of the modules, and just to give you a feel of kind of how the module looks or how it feels, and I'll ask you to write in the chat any questions that might come up on the screen. So this is from Module 5. Module 5 is about how to help learners engage with information better. And this was a module that I studied while completing this, creating this presentation online, because it's very easy just to put a lot of stuff online and yeah, not really think about how people are going to receive that. So in a module, and in this one, there would be 6 sections to complete. So I'd start with the introduction, the principles, the apply, and then reflecting. So here, I'll just run you through what we've got in this module for the introduction. And I have condensed it a bit to kind of hopefully respect the limits of working memory. So just 3 points of thinking about how to help or to introduce why or how to help learners engage with information better. So as teachers, we want our learners to make connections and more deeply understand information. But often the way that we present material and information can create barriers to our learners, for our learners. So this would be the way that we present information, large blocks of texts, long presentations, maybe like this, can create barriers like processing difficulties, working memory, attention. These barriers can be a form for our learners. But we can adjust our online lessons to help learners engage with information more easily. In fact, the online classroom can offer a really rich variety of ways to help learners engage with new information, and also that makes sense for a diverse range of learners as well. So in this module, you'll learn 3 principles to help your learners better engage with information in your online classroom, and some strategies that you can use in your upcoming lessons. So let's look at one of the principles. And that one is number 3, activate the different senses. So to help learners engage with information better, we're suggesting to activate the different senses. So this principle, I'm going to tell you, what is this principle? How does this benefit our learners? And how can you apply this in your online classroom? So before I tell you about this principle, I just want to ask a question. Can you think of your favorite smell or scent? And write in the chat, what is the smell? Why do you like it? And is it linked to a specific memory for you? So we've got vanilla, lemon, pine trees, chocolate. Ooh, mine is laundry powder, a specific laundry powder. It's called surf, cold water surf. And it's linked to the memory of fresh sheets or getting back into bed, my childhood home. Got a lot of cocoa butter, lavender, I love lavender, countryside after raining, coffee, bananas, fresh bread, jasmine, I also love jasmine. Oh, there's a lot of similarities in people's favorite smells. Must be something behind that. All right, thanks everybody. I'll move on to sharing a little bit more about this principle. So activate the senses. What is this principle? What does it have to do with learning? So I've got 4 points to share here. So one is the idea that we make more connections when more parts of our brain are activated. So we often present information with one modality, so for example, written or verbal, but our brains make more connections and therefore retain more information when more parts of the brain are activated. Then using the different senses in our lessons means that more parts of the brain are activated at a time. So this is called multisensory learning or multisensory techniques. We can use multisensory techniques to help convey information through the different senses like touch, smell, taste, and movement. And multisensory techniques give our learners more than one way to make connections and learn concepts. So how does this benefit our learners? So learners who find reading or listening particularly challenging, it's good for these kinds of learners because learners who struggle with visual or auditory processing may have a hard time learning through only reading or listening. And then many learners, especially learners with dyslexia, need to feel and see what they're learning in order to understand. But while using the senses is important, we also need to manage how we use them. So to avoid overloading students and scaffolding and monitoring how our learners are coping with using so many senses. So how can you activate the senses in your remote lessons? So you've seen the principle and the benefits, and so here are the strategies. And as mentioned, this resource was designed for experienced teachers, so some of these may not be new, but let's have a look. So strategy 1, tasks that make learners move around their environment and share back. So an example of this was the one that I did at the beginning of the session where I said, can you go and find something from your environment, hold it in your hand, and then share with me how this makes you feel. Strategy 2 would be combining reading with another sense. So, for example, reading and body movements, percussion and clapping, or reading and sound, music, melodies. Strategy 3, assign homework with real life tasks. So ask your learners to eat a meal and then write something about it. And another strategy. Strategy 4, experiment with using scents to promote memory. So I think there were a lot of people that said that lavender was a scent that they associated with something positive or a good memory. So, I mean, I encourage you to try using scents in your class. So scent and memory and learning have been found to be closely linked in the brain. So maybe you could ask learners to name a scent in their environment, and then a week later, ask them to reflect if associating this smell with the task helped their recall. Something to try. So let's skip forward to the part of the group discussion where we would reflect on the module. So I'll ask you to come back into the chat and see if there's anything that you would reflect on for this. So activating the different senses. Can you write in the chat, how could you use this in your classroom? What would be the benefits? And are there any challenges that you might see to using this in the remote teaching classroom? So can you think of any benefits and challenges? I'll share the previous slide again, as someone suggested. So how could you use this? Shy students, challenges, students are too shy to share. Challenging for lower level students. Starting with color, yes. I like this one. How many red things can you see? Move around and find them. That's a lovely example. Use dance and poetry. Body parts, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Yes. Yes. So yeah, I can see a lot of. Let's go back. Yeah, a lot of ways that people can already, or teachers can already see, to use this in the classroom, and also uncovering some challenges and thinking about. It's not easy to use all of these strategies, but thinking about what could you do in your context to bring some of these in and use them with your learners. So I'm just going to spin back to where we started this presentation and think about, why do we need a toolkit for inclusive teaching strategies? So remember, we had Marco, and Marco was this teenage male student in your class who finds it difficult to organize and plan. He's often appears bored or disinterested, and he doesn't appear to understand instructions or tasks. So Marco doesn't enjoy reading long text, but he can speak well in class. He's sociable and can be very creative in group settings. There's a last kind of task for the chat. We have this idea that as teachers, it's our responsibility to set up the conditions where learners like Marco can succeed and thrive. And this toolkit is designed for language teachers in remote teaching contexts who might be asking themselves questions like, how can I help my learners like Marco to participate more? Or how can I support learners with special education needs? Or how can I make my classroom more inclusive? So I'd like to hear if anyone else has a learning question in your chat. A learning question that you can put in the chat. So how can I do this? Or has this provoked anything in your own practice that that you might be interested in taking forward to think about while going through the toolkit. So I'll leave you with that. And then we got the toolkit, which will be available on the British Council America's website later this month. We do have a version of the toolkit available to download here. There's a QR code, and there's also a link to a Google Drive folder, which has the 7 modules there, which you can download as a PDF. And I will post the link in. Yeah, I think that the links will also be sent out by Paul later.
Yeah, I will be sending them out.
Thanks. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you everybody for listening to the session. Very much enjoyed seeing all of your responses in the chat, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Katie. That's great. It's really interesting. It's a lot of work, no, producing that toolkit.
Yeah, it's been we've been working hard on it for the last little while. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, really good. And fantastic that there is that available. I think particularly, as people are kind of working online a little bit, and just that sort of need for something to sort of guide people is really going to be incredibly useful. So thank you. Got a few questions here. It's quite a few from Fernando Akize. I'm going to start though with Josh. Hi, Josh. Josh Underwood in Bilbao asks, which of the modules would include strategies or activities for helping learners think about and understand how they can include and help one another learn better online? Is there a module that includes that?
I think there is. So one of the modules that we have is module 7. It's about building belonging in the online classroom, which I think Marie touched on before, and as one of the kind of ideas of the toolkit is how to develop self-esteem and understanding of yourself and with other learners in the classroom as well. So it's creating a more inclusive environment, not just from the teacher to the learners, but with the learners within themselves as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Fernando's questions. Victoria Allen, you might understand this better than I do, but would you say inclusive learning design and universal design for learning are synonymous? Sorry to put you on the spot with that one.
I think that they are complementary, and I think maybe, I don't know if they're synonymous, but I really love and use UDL or universal design for learning. Universal design for learning quite a lot, and for people out there who don't know what it is, it's another framework. So it's a framework that supports teachers to kind of make the shift from traditional models of education to a different approach by looking at kind of 3 broad areas of ways to get students to interact with each other, interact with the materials, and express themselves in different ways. I think that they borrow a lot. I think the UDL framework is often used more for the classroom, so how to get teachers and educators to create more inclusive learning environments. Our focus of inclusive learning design is more around how to create more inclusive online learning products that might be used in a teaching context or in self-study. So we kind of borrow from UDL for a lot of those as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions from Fernando. There's a couple. What new types of exclusion to online environments? So what types of exclusion to online environments promote? What can we do to deal with this in order to promote inclusion? I'm guessing the answer is get the toolkit, and that will help. But,
there is actually, there's in module 2 of the toolkit, it's looking at the online, the physical environment of the learner. So it's called how to how to, I've forgotten the name, but how to create a more inclusive learning environment. So it's thinking about what you can do in your digital environment to promote that, but then also thinking about where are your learners, what are their contexts, and what are the barriers that those specific learning contexts are, what's happening for them. And so, but then also thinking about what are the advantages and how can you kind of leverage those learning environments. So if learners are at home, then one of the barriers that they may have would be access to a device, access to a private space, distractions like domestic distractions, having parents coming in. But then those parents as well could also be supporting them. They feel more comfortable at home and more relaxed, and maybe they are in a private space where they are able to communicate better than they would in the classroom. So there are sort of good things and negative things about the learners' remote language learning environments. And so I think what we promote in the toolkit is to understand where your learners are, what their barriers are, and then think about how to mitigate those barriers or leverage the advantages of their specific environments.
Okay. I just had a question because you said that the toolkit that you developed was developed for the British Council in the Americas. So was there, when you were developing the toolkit, was it did you have a specific platform or platforms in mind around remote teaching, or is the idea that the toolkit is applicable to teachers working with multiple platforms or different platforms?
Yeah, good question. We so in the research we identified a variety of different remote teaching contexts, and it wasn't so some of those were where learners were all in separate places. Some of those is where learners were all in one classroom, but the teacher was somewhere else, so they were kind of beaming into the classroom. So we found that there was such a wide variety of different contexts that we didn't focus on a specific platform. And I think that a lot of the strategies we've tried to suggest using open source, if for any kind of platforms and things that we suggest, they're open source or free to use or very commonly used. We haven't focused on a specific platform, but hopefully we've provided a range of options for people to look at.
All right. And just a sort of follow-up questions from Chaima. Is the toolkit culture specific, or is it kind of a generic toolkit?
That's a good question. I think that I think it's fairly generic in that we don't reference specific cultural norms. But I think one of the things that we really do encourage in the toolkit is reflection on your own context. So we provide a range of strategies, but one of the kind of fundamental things is to think about how these work for your context. So it's about here are some options, but before you take these options, you have to kind of understand your learners' needs, your environment. So it's about applying them to your cultural context rather than here is kind of a spoon-fed way or like things that would work for these different contexts. So